February 16, 1878, Lyons Weekly Mirror, Lyons, Iowa. Expose of another bogus medium. The Philadelphia Times has a long report of recent disturbance at a spiritual seance in that city, in which the medium, Dr. Henry C. Gordon, was seized by one of the persons present. The scene is described as follows. A hymn was started, and faces appeared at the aperture. Dr. DeYoung of 5th Street near Race recognized Jane Gallagher, who had been killed by a fall. Her brother, he said, who was in business on 2nd Street, above Arch, recently failed. Mr. Lippincott thought he recognized the face of a middle-aged lady who could not talk. Mr. Lippincott's eldest son walked to the aperture when the name Henry was called. When he returned to his seat, he said, "That was the spirit of my brother-in-law. He attempted to recover a valuable knife that had fallen into the water. He was mistaken in the depth and was drowned. I know it was he, because he held the knife in his hand. It is indeed a remarkable circumstance." The only figure that walked from the cabinet was Helen. Mr. Stetson said she would not come out unless all joined hands. Her head appeared black, there was a white handkerchief around her neck, and her gown was black. Dr. Gordon had evidently taken the rear curtain from off its wire and girdled it around his waist. Helen shook hands with Sweetum and the youngest Lippincott. Helen dematerialized, sinking into the floor, and a chorus of wonderful, remarkable went up. At last there appeared at the aperture the black-haired and black-bearded individual who represented John Brackley, the friend of the young lady's friend. Some spiritualists, however, persisted in recognizing him as John Shedwick, formerly an engineer on a New Jersey railroad. The spirit, however, persisted in being John Brackley, and so John Walsh, a South Street plumber, who has been creeping into the confidence of the medium, was called up to have a talk with John. Mr. Walsh walked to the curtain and then stooped a little to peer in. The curtain was between him and John Brackley. The spiritualists looked on with apparent enjoyment. A number of gentlemen of substantial form, who were sprinkled throughout the audience, looked solemn and serious. Suddenly, Mr. Walsh sprang forward and grasped in his arms John Brackley, curtain and all. That little room became a little pandemonium. The substantial-looking gentlemen each jumped to their feet, and each collared a pugilistically disposed spiritualist. A young man in the rear struck a match and lighted a plumber's lamp, with which Mr. Walsh had provided him, and with this he lighted every burner in the room. The women mounted the chairs and screamed. The young lady who had seen the bogus spirit of her mother laughed until the tears came into her eyes. John Brackley, still behind the curtain, kicked and struggled in a most mortal manner, but never a word said. A big spiritualist, the capturing party was not large enough to hold more than a portion of the audience in check, ran to John's rescue and struck Mr. Walsh in the eye. Mr. Walsh lost his grip, but as the spirit slipped through his arms, he quickly put his hand through the aperture and lifted John Brackley's scalp, a little skull cap of black silk. The spirit did not dematerialize, but ran to the other end of the curtain, and here it came in view as Dr. Henry C. Gordon, the medium, and here it was seen to stuff a black beard beneath its vest. Mr. Walsh, buried beneath the ruins of the foremost curtain, which his last clutch had brought to the ground, disclosing the fact that the rear curtain had been removed from its wire to make Helen's dress, was being poked with spiritualists' umbrellas. Meanwhile, in front of the cabinet, a regular free fight was progressing between the spiritualists and the exposers. Daniel Snyder, a burly photographer, being attacked by manager Stetson, picked the latter up and threw him head foremost against the wall. Mr. Jonathan Roberts of Burlington, New Jersey, caught Mr. Snyder by the arm and was himself grasped by the throat and thrown into a corner. Gordon, having escaped from Walsh, ran quickly from the cabinet into the middle of the room, where he was caught by a young man who threw him on his knees. Manager Stetson, this was immediately before he was thrown against the wall, pounced upon the young man. Gordon was again up, and running quickly through the fighting audience, reached the door of an adjoining apartment. Here he was again laid hold of by another young gentleman, who threw him over a small stove. Sweetums struck the gentleman in the eye, and Gordon, who had fallen upon his back, turned the stove over onto his assailant, and, quickly rising, escaped from the room and downstairs. Mr. Roberts and a few other spiritualists were highly indignant over what they termed an outrage. Many of the spiritualists, however, laughed at their own folly and quickly left the house, and, in fact, many of them who joined the exposing party had attended the seances for the purposes of investigation, but detected the humbug when the spirit was grabbed. After a vain attempt to recover their admission fees, the exposers left the house in triumphal procession, with John Brackley's silk black wig in their possession. November 9, 1922, Dawson Daily News, Yukon Territory. Herald angels are to sing on radiophone. Broadcasting station in heaven coming soon, he says. Ancients get the craze. No meals there, they just sniff the earthly saucepans. Chicago. The spirit world is fast picking up the intricacies of radio telephony. Already faint radio messages have been received from heaven by spiritualists, and it is only a matter of time before the great minds on the other shore will have set up a broadcasting station for communication with this earth. These were the assertions Tuesday of John Slater, considered one of the most gifted of the world's mediums, and one of the leaders of spiritualistic thought, who is here for the convention of the National Spiritualist Association. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle predicted last spring that radio would soon be used for transetheric communication, but Slater is the first spiritualist to announce that the startling development has arrived. Interest in radio is not restricted to the spirits of recent arrivals, Slater declared. Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and many other ancients have communicated with him from time to time, Slater says, and probably will use the radio as soon as heaven gets the craze. I certainly expect to see the spirits set up a broadcasting station in heaven, Slater said. Sending times and wavelengths will, of course, be adjusted so that bedtime stories and grain market quotations won't be interrupted, but regular service will be given. Only spiritualists will be able to detect the spirit messages, however. I have heard faint radio messages already, and with the assistance of my son, who is a radio engineer, I expect to get better results soon. We may even be able to hear concerts from beyond, and if the spirits think it worthwhile, they may give us programs occasionally with speeches by great men of history and songs by spirits of great singers passed away. Mrs. Maggie Waite of Chicago, also a world-famous medium, contributed some interesting sidelights on the character of heaven as revealed to her by its inhabitants. Spirits tell me, said Mrs. Waite, that they do not eat. They simply inhale the aromas of our earthly meals. They do not sleep, but they have periods of rest. Life in heaven is just the same as it is here. but there is no marriage or giving in marriage. Everyone, however, will find his soulmate there, whom he might have missed on earth. When they meet, they will hold hands for eternity.